everyone, and welcome to this week's Main Deck Monday, your source from THL content from the meta to the memes and everything in between. Your host, Josh Sampson, and this week we are going to be going over the infamous Cubelock deck. So, Cubelock, in general, it is a control-oriented Warlock deck. Your game plan is to get to the late game and put in some really big threats as early as possible, and hope that just overrules anything your opponent can do and just dwindle them down to nothing. Now, this deck has a lot of intricate pieces and is a very synergistic deck. A lot of the deck works together and works hand in hand to make it tick. Without some of these cards, this deck wouldn't be viable at all. So, let's start by going over those. First, Skull of the Minari. That's the new Warlock legendary weapon, and it lets you put in some big costing demons into play for very cheap. It lets you put in cards like Voidlord and Doomguard that have either really high cost or some really high negative effects if you play them from your hand, such as discarding 2 cards in without those downsides. And you get to do it over and over and over again every single turn. This card is very, very crucial, and it kind of goes hand in hand with Possessed Lackey, which when it dies lets you do the same thing. So you have 3 copies of these cards in your deck that let you put in these big demons that are really important to the deck in early or for cheap without the downsides. That said, what big demons are we trying to put into play? Voidlord. This card is so good against the aggressive decks. If you put a 3/9 taunt that when it dies gives you 3 1/3 taunts, it's so hard for the aggressive decks like Paladin and Hunter to get through that. They don't have enough things that can just push through that much damage. Against the control decks, you're really looking to put in things like Doomguard, which is a 5/7 charge that has a huge downside if you play it from your hand, but because you get it cheated into play with Skull of the Minari or your Possessed Lackeys, you don't have that downside. You just get a really high-statted card with no downside. Now, the namesake of the deck is Cube. It's because you have this card called Carnivorous Cube in the deck that lets you destroy one of your minions to get more copies of it. So you destroy your Voidlord, and you get 2 more Voidlords plus the Death Rattle off of it. Or it lets you combo and do a lot of burst damage with Doomguard, where you hit your opponent for 5 with Doomguard, destroy it, and then immediately kill your cube to do another 10 points of burst damage. So you have a lot of reach and a lot of versatility with this deck. The last big card we want to highlight is Blood Revel Gul'dan. This lets you bring back more copies of the bunch of Doomguards you've played because you've played 1, killed it with the cube, got 2 more off the cube, and you've done that twice at 6 Doomguards. You can actually 30 your opponent just playing Blood Reaver Gul'dan, or you can just put a ton of stats of Voidlords into play and just so much taunt that there's no way your aggressive opponent can get through. It's really, really strong and really, really crucial. That being said, Cubelock has a lot of variants that are floating around. The one that we're looking at now is just a very stocked version that just has good cards in all of the matchups and is just trying to play a very good deck against everything. This is much more of a ladder deck with the list that we're currently looking at. That being said, there are a handful of different ways that this deck can get tuned to have better matchups here or there. The first one is by adding cards like N'Zoth the Corruptor. So N'Zoth is really good against the control decks. It lets you have a lot more versatility, a lot more reach, and gives you another big end threat like Blood Reaver that lets you survive going through a Wrath like a Twisting Nether or a Psychic Scream. You put all your Voidlords into play, they've killed them all again, you get to play N'Zoth, and you get a bunch of Voidlords back, you get your Mistress of Mixtures, you get your Possessed Lackeys, just put a lot of threats back onto the battlefield. Some versions are even cutting the cubes and the Doomguards and playing cards like Mountain Giant, just have more threats that they can put in on turn 4, turn 5, just put these big 8/8s on the field that are really hard for people to deal with right now. Lots of silence effects going around, but not a lot of things that destroy things. You're not seeing any big game hunters. Most of the Razo or Priest decks either run 1 Shadow Word Death or none at all because they're running Spiteful Summoner. They don't have room for that sort of card. Third, we have Rin. Rin is really, really good against the Razo Priest decks. If you play this and start going on the seals as soon as you can, usually you want to play around with the Spellbreakers, so you want to be Dark Pacting it as soon as you play it, but you start playing your seal on 7, and then play it on 8, play it on 9, play your last 2 on 10, and then on turn 11, you're destroying their entire deck, and the Razo Priest usually can't come back from that unless they've already Razo'd and they've already Shadow Reapered, and they have a bunch of cards still in their hand to be able to just burst you down from there. It's unlikely, but possible. The last card we're going to look at is Twisting Nether. It's one of the cards that I don't have in my ladder version, but playing it in THL isn't necessarily bad. If your opponent might be bringing more mid-ranging things that are trying to just outlast what you're doing, this is really, really good, and lets you just have that versatility. That being said, this is just a nice average Cubelock list. You have a lot of versatility in the faceless manipulators, the different cards you're doing, and that is all you need to know about Cubelock. Last thing we're going to go over is the matchups. The current version is, like I said, versatile against everything. You can tune it, you can make it more good against the control decks, the priests, the mirror matches, adding in cards like Rin and Nazoth and the Giants, and cutting things like your Doomguards and your Cubes and your Spirit Umbras. Or you can tune it more towards the aggressive decks, cut those same sort of cards, and instead put in things like Tar Creepers and more heals, more taunts, and just play this more early defensive early game to get you to the late game of just playing just Void Lords over and over and over again, and then it's really hard for you to lose from that position. That being said, that is your main deck Monday for this week. Thank you all once again, and have a great night. I hope to see you next week.